A couple months ago, I was working with a coaching client. We were opening up our calendars. We were trying to schedule our follow-up coaching session. And as we were looking several weeks out, I was looking at my calendar and realized that I had so many just meaningless meetings that were loaded into my calendar. It made it really, really difficult for us to actually find an entire day that we could schedule our next coaching session. And so it was at that time that I realized and I committed to myself that I was going to cut my meeting time in half over the next 30 days. And when I say meeting time, I don't mean my coaching sessions. I actually wanted to free up time so that I could take on more coaching sessions. That's where I make money. But I wanted to cut my non-revenue generating meeting sessions in half. And I was able to do it. And there was really three things that I learned and three kind of tricks or tips that I used to help me achieve this. I want to share those with you today. And then I'm also creating a follow-up video that has 6 tips for the remaining time that you actually are spending in meetings. You're going to be left with some time that you still have to spend in meetings. How to make that time spent twice as efficient and twice as impactful as it is today. So the first video will show you how to cut your meeting time in half. The second video will show you how to make the time that you are still spending in meetings twice as impactful. So the first thing that I had to do is I just had to change my meeting mindset. And what I mean by this is I was saying yes, as I looked at my calendar, I was saying yes to so many meetings that I really didn't want to be a part of, or I didn't want to say yes to, but I was doing it because I just wanted to be polite. I wanted to help people out. I wanted to surround myself with great people. And what I had to do was realize that every time I was saying yes to that, I was not protecting my own time. I was saying no to something else, whether it was time that I should be spending on more important projects, whether it was time that I could be coaching with other teams, whether it was just personal time for my own development or my own enjoyment, whether it was time to golf or spend time with my family. Every time I said yes to a meeting, I was subliminally or unintentionally saying no to something else. And so I just had to flip my mindset. And now every time a meeting gets asked to me, I really ask myself, am I taking this meeting to be polite, or am I taking this meeting because it's a meeting that I really feel like is going to be beneficial to me? I'm going to be a little bit more selfish with my time when taking meetings now. And I just realized that was something that I had to do. Now, saying no to meetings isn't always easy. And so I found this second tip that really helped me say no to a lot more meetings without ever having to be rude or impolite. So what I do now is I always require an agenda before I'll say yes to any meeting. Even if it's a meeting that I know I'll take, or if it's a meeting, if it's a lunch that somebody wants to take, if it's a phone call that they want to have, I always require an agenda before I'll say yes to the meeting. The other day I had a vendor who reached out to me. She's a vendor that I absolutely love. I love working with her and talking with her. And she said, hey, Corey, I'd love to get 15 minutes. She emailed me and said, I'd love to get 15 minutes on the phone that I can share with you some new features that we have that I think you'll really enjoy. I just replied back. I said, hey, I don't mean to be rude, but if you can just put those new features in an email, I'd love to look those over. And if I feel like a phone call is still necessary, we can certainly jump on the call. I'm just really trying to protect my own time and not take meetings or phone calls that aren't absolutely necessary. She respected that. Took her a couple days. She sent me an email back. It had 7 new features. She was right. The features were amazing. I loved every single one of them. But I also realized that I didn't need to have a phone call, that I could read that email and in 60 seconds, I could get all the information that I was going to get out of a 15-minute meeting. And so I replied to her back, said thank you very much, and didn't have any questions about it. And it was a really great way to protect my time. And this is just the mindset that I take moving forward. I require an agenda before I'll ever take any phone call, meeting, lunch, or anything. And really, one of two things happens. The first one is a lot of people just self-select, and the answer is no by default, right? They either realize that they didn't have an agenda and that they were just kind of selfishly trying to borrow or get in touch with me, or sometimes they realize that they're just too lazy to put together an agenda. It just wasn't worth it for them to put together an agenda. And if they're not willing to take the time to put together an agenda, it's certainly, I don't owe them the time for the meeting. And so a lot of people just, the answer becomes no because they don't have an agenda that they'll ever send. Now, sometimes people do still send an agenda, which is great. I find that sometimes, like that vendor, she sent kind of an agenda. We didn't need any more discussion. I got all the information that I needed, and really she was just sharing information, and so I was able to get it that way. But sometimes there is a meeting that's still required. What I find is that those meetings tend to be far more impactful because we're all coming prepared, knowing exactly what our outcomes are and what we're trying to accomplish at that meeting. And so require an agenda for every single meeting is a really easy way that a lot of meetings will just immediately fall off your calendar. I also find that I get asked a lot less frequently to take meetings now because people know that if they're going to ask me for a meeting, they're going to have to come with an agenda before I'll say yes to the meeting. And so a lot fewer people are asking for meetings. It starts to kind of self-select. The third thing that I did to cut my meeting time in half is I went through my calendar and I looked at every recurring meeting that I had, and I wrote them down on a piece of paper, and then I deleted them from my calendar. And I had to intentionally add back every recurring meeting in order to make it back into my calendar. But before I would add it back, I reached out to every person who was involved and I would ask, do you feel like we still have a need for this meeting? If they said yes, I would ask several other follow-up questions. Do we need to make them as frequent? Do we need to make them as long? Do we need to have the same people involved? Do I need to be there for every meeting, or can I only be there for some of the meetings? Is there a way that we can make the meeting agenda better or achieve our outcomes in a more efficient manner? And so we started to look at every single recurring meeting that I had. I was able to cut out a whole bunch of them or reduce the frequency, the amount of time time spent or not have to show up to every single one because I wasn't needed at every single meeting. And so in doing so, I reduced a lot of the recurring meetings that were swallowing up my calendar and just taking up a lot of my time. And so these were the 3 things that I did to cut my meeting time in half in a 30-day period. I started by changing my meeting mindset. I require an agenda for every single meeting now before I'll say yes. And I removed every single recurring meeting and only added them back after making the decision that they were absolutely necessary, and by asking a series of questions that could, even if they were still necessary, reduce the frequency or the amount of time that I had to spend in those meetings. Hopefully this helps you out, and check out the follow-up video to get 6 great tips that you can take to make the time that you're still spending in meetings twice as efficient.